You're wearing something right now. You probably haven't thought about it once today. But the thing covering your body is one of the most consequential inventions in the history of our species, and we have almost no idea when it happened or why. Most people assume the answer is obvious. We got cold, we grabbed a skin, problem solved. But that's not what the evidence shows, and the real story is far stranger and far more human than anyone expected. Let's start with what we actually know. Humans are, biologically, nearly hairless apes. Every other great ape, the chimpanzee, the gorilla, the orangutan, has a thick coat of fur. We don't, and that's not normal. That's a deviation. Something happened along the way that stripped most of our body hair away, and once it was gone, something else had to replace it. The question is, when? We can't find ancient clothing. Fabric rots, leather disintegrates, fur disappears. The oldest surviving textiles are roughly 34,000 years old, twisted plant fibers found in a cave in the Republic of Georgia. But that date almost certainly isn't the beginning. It's just the oldest thing that survived long enough for us to find it. To find the real origin, scientists had to look somewhere completely unexpected. Lice. In 2003, a researcher named Mark Stoneking at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology ran a genetic analysis on human body lice, not head lice, body lice, the kind that live specifically in clothing, in the seams and the fibers, not on skin. Here's why that matters. Body lice cannot survive without fabric. They need fibers to lay their eggs. Without clothing, body lice as a species simply cannot exist, which means body lice as a distinct species could not have diverged from head lice before clothing existed. So Stoneking's team asked one question: when did that divergence happen? The answer, based on mutation rates, was somewhere between 72,000 and 170,000 years ago. Clothing, by this estimate, is older than agriculture by over 60,000 years, older than cave paintings, older than the mass migration of humans out of Africa. We were dressing ourselves before we were fully modern, but this opens a harder question. Why? If you live in sub-Saharan Africa, where temperatures routinely exceed 40 degrees Celsius, clothing is not obviously useful. It traps heat, it adds weight, it requires time and effort to make and maintain. The simplest explanation, that we got cold, doesn't hold in the region where clothing appears to have first emerged. So what was actually driving it? Part of the answer goes back much further. Roughly 1.5 to 2 million years ago, our ancestors began doing something no other primate was doing. They started running, long distances, across open savanna, chasing prey to exhaustion under a full African sun. To do that, the body had to solve a heat problem, and evolution's solution was extreme: strip away most of the fur, expand the sweat glands massively. We have 10 times more sweat glands per square inch of skin than a chimpanzee. That system made us extraordinary endurance hunters. We couldn't outrun a lion, but we could outlast one. We could follow an animal across 20 miles of open ground until it collapsed from heat exhaustion while we were still moving. But the same adaptation that made us lethal in the midday heat made us dangerously vulnerable everywhere else. Cold nights, high altitudes, rain. The East African highlands, where temperatures fall sharply after dark. The body that had been optimized to sprint across a sun-baked plain had almost nothing between its skin and the cold. The first clothing may not have been about winter. It may have been about 3 a.m., when the fire burned low, when the temperature dropped, when the wind came in from the savannah and there was nothing left to do but pull something warm across your body and wait for the sun to come back. A scraped animal hide, a bundle of grass, whatever was available. Functional, necessary, unremarkable. But warmth alone still doesn't explain what came next. Because within a few thousand years of clothing's probable origin, something shifted, and the evidence for it is sitting in a grave in Russia. In 1955, Soviet archaeologists excavating a burial site called Sungir, northeast of Moscow, uncovered something that stopped them completely. The grave of a single individual, dated to roughly 34,000 years ago, contained over 3,000 mammoth ivory beads, carefully drilled, carefully arranged, sewn into patterns across what had clearly been a garment. Researchers who studied the site later estimated that producing those beads, the drilling, the shaping, the threading, would have taken a minimum of 10,000 hours. 10,000 hours. For a garment buried with one person, never worn again. This was not survival equipment. This was not warmth. This was something operating on an entirely different level. This was meaning. Which forces us to ask a different question entirely. Not when did clothing start, but what did it become, and how fast? Anthropologists studying unrelated hunter-gatherer cultures separated by thousands of miles have found the same pattern repeating. Body decoration, with pigment, with animal skins, with shells, with specific markings, is one of the earliest and most universal forms of human social communication. The oldest known personal ornaments are shell beads from the caves of Blombos in South Africa, dated to at least 75,000 years ago, worn, deliberately selected, arranged in ways that carried information. Around the same period that body lice suggest clothing first appeared, humans were already thinking carefully about how they looked to others. Clothing, from almost the beginning, was never purely functional. It was a signal. It told people what group you belonged to, what you had killed, what rank you held, what ceremony you were part of, who you were, who you weren't. It marked the hunter from the elder, the mourner from the warrior, the initiated from the child. In many cultures, the wrong garment in the wrong context wasn't just unusual, it was dangerous. Wearing what you hadn't earned was an offense. Wearing what belonged to another group was a provocation. The piece of fabric on your body carried weight that had nothing to do with warmth. It still does. Every dress code, every uniform, every deliberate choice made in front of a mirror in the morning, all of it is the same ancient behavior running on the same ancient logic. Who do I want to be seen as today? And here's the part of this story that almost no one talks about. Making fitted clothing, the kind that actually holds its shape, that covers the body efficiently, that can be sewn and repaired, requires a technology that didn't exist in large numbers until relatively recently. Bone needles. The same needles needed to pierce hide and thread sinew appear in the archaeological record around 50,000 years ago. Their arrival coincides almost exactly with what researchers call the Upper Paleolithic Revolution, a sudden, dramatic explosion of symbolic behavior across the human record. Cave paintings, long-distance trade networks, musical instruments, ritual burial, complex tool-making. Abstract thinking made visible in the physical world for the first time. Clothing didn't just appear during that revolution. Some researchers believe it was part of what caused it. Here's why. Making fitted clothing requires a specific kind of cognition. You have to hold a three-dimensional shape in your mind and work backwards from it. You have to measure without numbers, plan without writing, anticipate a future state that doesn't exist yet and build toward it incrementally, one cut at a time. The mental flexibility required to picture a finished garment and then construct it from raw materials is not simple. It is the same cognitive architecture that allows you to plan a multi-day hunt, to tell a story with a beginning and an end, to imagine consequences you haven't experienced, to conceive of a god. We may have learned to dress ourselves, and in doing so, built the mental infrastructure that made everything else possible. Language, art, religion, trade, civilization. All of it may trace part of its origin to a person sitting in firelight somewhere in Africa or the Levant, holding a bone needle, trying to figure out how to close a seam. There's one more layer to this. When clothing spread, and it spread far, following humans into every climate on Earth, it didn't just change how humans survived, it changed what humans could survive. Without clothing, anatomically modern humans could not have colonized Siberia, could not have crossed into Northeast Asia, could not have walked the land bridge into the Americas. The peopling of the entire planet was made possible, in part, by the ability to wrap a body against temperatures that would otherwise be lethal. Every human being alive today, in every country, at every latitude, is a descendant of people who solved the clothing problem well enough to make it through. The ones who didn't solve it didn't survive to become your ancestors. Tonight you'll take off whatever you're wearing and think nothing of it. But the thing you put on tomorrow morning connects you in a direct line to a human being who lived at least 100,000 years ago, who was cold in the dark, who scraped an animal's skin clean and wrapped it around their body for the first time, and discovered that the world was suddenly more survivable. And somewhere along the way, that same human, or one who came after, noticed something else. That the thing they were wearing said something about them to everyone watching, and they started making it better, more deliberate, more specific, more layered with meaning. 10,000 hours of drilling ivory beads into a garment that would never be worn again. That wasn't waste, that was the beginning of culture. The origin of human clothing isn't really a story about staying warm, it's a story about what happens when a species becomes conscious of itself. When being seen starts to matter as much as surviving, when the question stops being, will I make it through tonight, and becomes something far more dangerous and far more human. What do I look like to everyone else? We've been answering that question ever since, one layer at a time.